And we have a recording going, and today is the 26th, and we're here for our last session. And as we've discussed at our previous sessions, our series outcomes are that we really want to prepare our district and school leaders for a successful continuous improvement experience. And the way that we've been trying to work through that is to collaboratively apply the MICIP process, and then to share our successes and challenges with that process in the platform as we go. And of course, we want to bring that learning back to all of our district teams. And so we'll make sure to have some time to reflect about that today. Specifically for today, we are going to kind of pull everything together. So all of that data work and root cause work that we did at sessions 1 and 2, when we worked on the goals, end targets, and interim targets in session 3 last time. And we're really going to be moving into strategies and activities today. So that's kind of our first outcome. And as for our second outcome, we want to be able to navigate the MICIP portfolio. So we're going to get in there and we're going to really understand the whole implement, monitor, adjust, and evaluate time. We are also going to give some options at this time that I'll discuss later. If we have some established teams that would like some more extended work time, you would also during this time be able to just spend some extended work time working through the process. But I will be recording that section that we're doing on the implement, monitor, adjust, and evaluate. So either way is going to be fine. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. And of course, our third outcome is to reflect on moving that process forward for our districts. And just as far as our facilitators go, we still have the teams here. So my name is Dave Hunt, and I'm the Continuous Improvement and State and Federal Programs Consultant for the Muskegon ISD. And Hilda is here from Dearborn, is the instructional coach, school improvement specialist, and also current assistant principal. So welcome, Hilda. Hilda is going to be monitoring the chat.
Good morning.
Thank you. And she's going to be monitoring the chat and also answering questions and doing a variety of other tasks throughout the day. Frank is furiously working away at our breakout rooms as always. So Frank, really appreciate that back end work. Frank is the Director of Instructional Services for Allegan AISA. And Mike is here. He's the Continuous Improvement and Science Consultant for the Ottawa ISD. And Mike's going to be monitoring the chat and also is my reminder of when to start and stop the recording. So Mike, appreciate your efforts. And we do have Ben and Terry are here from the MICIP team. And Ben, anything that you'd like to add before we get started?
Other than to really thank the team for all the work, time, and energy that they put into leading this. It's been exciting to see this come together. So I just really want to make sure that I don't forget to do that at the end. Thanking all of you, as well as all the participants for all your good work that's going on in districts right now.
Thank you very much, Ben. Just a quick reminder, we do have 2 collaboration tools that you're welcome to use as we go through this. The first is our frequently asked questions document that we created last time. And we did get that updated based off of questions that were asked last time. So if you want to check in on that FAQ document, that is right on our dashboard, right here, the FAQ document. And if you wanted to add additional questions that we might want to address on that document, you're welcome to add questions, and anyone is welcome to crowdsource any of the answers there. We know that there's a lot of knowledge around the state, and there's a lot of people here that have a lot of great experience. So please use that experience and help everybody out today. Make this a real collaborative experience. And along those lines, we do have our resource repository. We've had many great resources put into the resource repository, and I'm guessing that there will be more that we'll be able to add today. All of these things here are great things to go back and take a look at that connect to all the different topics that we've talked about. So as you can see, there's been several things added by our participants as we've gone through the series. And so please feel free to continue to add to that to make this a collaborative series. And a little bit about today's optional session. Ben is going to be leading our optional session today that starts at 10:45. And we are going to be talking about equity work and continuous improvement. So there's no specific audience for this. We are all are welcome. So at some of our previous ones, we've had a real specific audience for a specific topic. And today we would just like to invite anybody that is available to stay As always, we'll be recording that session so that you'd be able to catch up on that later. And it sounds like it's going to be a really nice collaborative session where we're going to be able to hear a little bit about this and then also have some conversation time to talk about how this work, how to move this work forward and how it's going right now in our districts. So really looking forward to today's optional session. All right, so let's go ahead and just get caught up in MICIP. So I'm just going to pull over the training site and I'm going to go ahead and log in with my Launchpad. And all of this login information about how to get into the demo site is in our dashboard. See if I could successfully type the password. And I do. All right. So as we get in here, you'll notice that we're in progress and we have our MICIP PD with our little please don't touch request on it so that we don't get all of our work messed up for today. So if anybody does get in and mess around in the training site, if you can go ahead and start your own in there, that'd be great. So when we get into MICIP, you can see the dashboard, and right now we don't have any active goals. We just have some work that's in progress, but today we are actually going to finish that work and it's going to be in the portfolio. So this, where it says in progress, where it says MICIP PD, would actually move up to my portfolio. And so what you'll be able to do when you're in MICIP is you'll see all of your active goals, and then you'll see anything that you might be working on is going to be down here. So for now, I want to kind of walk through this whole process of where we've gotten to where we are today. And so we're going to start with the our Discover Data portion. And as a reminder, we've been working on a health and wellness goal. And we went in and we put in some MiFi data, and we put in some school climate survey data. We put in some tiered fidelity inventory data. And I'll kind of come back to this fishbone that we worked on. But these were all the different data sources that we were interested in when we started our work around student health and wellness. And so then what we did was we came through and we analyzed that data and we put in an initial data analysis. We thought about the current initiatives that might already be in place to work on student health and wellness. We thought about some gaps that might exist around our work on student health and wellness. And we finally wrote a district data story summary. From there, we went on to analyze what is going on. And so this is where we would get into root cause. And we decided that we wanted to do a fishbone and a 5 whys. And so the fishbone, we looked at all the different causal theories that might be going into and the issues that we were seeing around student health and wellness. And so we completed the fishbone first, and then we went back and we added the fishbone as a data source. So this is something kind of a foundational thought or idea about MICIP. As you're learning new things through the process, you can always go back and put in the new learning or new data sources that you're having. And so we did a fishbone, and we went back and we actually put the fishbone right in into this as a new data source. And once you do that, then you can, if there was further conversation or discussion that we needed to have about it, then we could go back and we could update any of the work that we were doing here. So that's just kind of one kind of foundational understanding about MICIP is you can always go back, you can always add new things. And so I'm going to go back to analyze. From there, we decided now we're ready to do 5 whys. We were able to kind of narrow down what our focus was using the fishbone, and we completed a 5 whys process. And we really started thinking about that we need our staff to really understand SEL work and the connection between social emotional learning and academic success. So that's kind of where we landed with our root cause analysis. From there, the next step in MICIP is to define a challenge statement. And these are if-then statements. And I really like the way that these if-then statements are set up. So the first part is the if part, right? So if staff have a better understanding of students' social emotional needs, then we can better engage staff or students and improve outcomes. And so when I look at this first part, the if statement, it's kind of telling me what are the sorts of things that we're going to have to do, right? So we need to build a better understanding of student social emotional needs. And then the then portion starts to help us to think about, well, what are some of the ways that we're going to know that that occurred? I think that this if then statement in your challenge statement is actually quite important. It helps you really zero in on what goal you're going to write and maybe some of the strategies that you select. And then it also helps you to decide what are some of the data sources that might be important to think about as we are tracking our progress on this. So don't underestimate the importance of this challenge statement section. It's a very important step. All right, next we got to the goal. And for our goal, we indicated that we wanted to improve student engagement and social emotional outcomes across all subgroups as measured by the MICIP and the school climate survey by June of 2024. And if you were with us at our last session, we talked a lot about SMART goals and then also SMARTY goals. So that was where we added in that inclusion and equity portion. And I recommend going back and reviewing that if you were not able to join us last time. A lot kind of goes into this goal and really trying to be inclusive of our students and being able to continue to work toward equity. So we actually set this out as a 3-year goal. And beyond defining the goal, you give it a shorter name. And this is just so it's kind of easily identifiable in your portfolio. And so we said that we wanted to improve student engagement and social emotional outcomes. Then we got down to defining our impact measures, and there are end targets and there are interim targets in MICIP. So when we were in assist, we had objectives, and here we have end targets and interim targets. And within that, you can see that we can have qualitative end targets or we can have quantitative end targets. And the same thing with interim targets. There's an additional category for interim targets that we'll talk about here in a second. And so we set one of our end targets was around the school climate survey. And we wanted to increase the percent of students that strongly or somewhat agree with I like school from 67% to 85% by June of 2024. And we also wanted to decrease the occurrence of students feeling unsafe or very unsafe at school by 6% by that June of 2024 timeframe. And one interim measure that we set was that is to say, we give the MICIP every 2 years. And so we thought, it'd be really great to check what the MICIP was going to look next year when we gave the MICIP again and see if we're on the right track. And so we said, let's check to see if by next year we were able to decrease it by 3%. And then finally, under interim targets, you can also make a task. And I just kind of wanted to demonstrate that real quick. So again, for your interim target measures, you can have quantitative or qualitative pieces. You can also have these tasks. And so we added a task there to say that we wanted to create a student forum to better understand the results of the student climate survey. And you can't see it gets cut off a little bit here, but we wanted to ensure participation by some of our historically underrepresented groups when we created that forum. And we wanted to do that. So you can see we had a shorter timeline on that. We want to do that by the end of October this year. So, so really you can do lots of stuff with these end targets and interim targets. You'll probably end up with multiple end targets and multiple interim targets for every goal that you create. And the last thing that I wanted to mention about this before we move on is that all of these tie to one specific data object. So for example, you can see here that our first end target tied to our school climate survey, and you can actually view the data objects about those, about each one of those. So you can see that that would link straight out to our school climate survey. All right, so I am going to pop over to select strategies, and we're getting to about where we left off last time. So last time we talked about the My Strategy Bank and My Strategy Bank's integration with MICIP, how to make My Strategy Bank accounts, how to find those things in My Strategy Bank. And last time we added the Healthy School Action Tool as our strategy. I also added a second one so that we can, just for some demonstration purposes later, but the one that we worked on last time was the Healthy School Action Tool. And so we can see a description. The Healthy School Action Tool, or the HSAT, is a suite of online tools designed to help Michigan schools and districts assess the health of their school environment and take action to improve those environments. And so we really thought that this connected really well with our goal of the social emotional well-being of our students. And as we talked about last time, there is the hexagon tool that can really help us to decide if the strategies that we're selecting are the right ones. And so this is a selection process. You first click on the strategy that you think might be good, and then you work through with your team to see, is there good evidence that this is a strategy that would be helpful for us? Is it usable? Does it have good supports as we're moving forward? And is this a need for our district right now? Is it a good fit for us? And do we have the capacity to do that? And so your team actually goes through and gives this ratings, and you can actually get a full suggestion of questions to address with your team before making the rating by clicking on the little pie pieces. And through that process, we finally decided that, yes, we wanted to select the Healthy School Action Tools as our strategy that we're going to put forward. And I just mentioned that I also added MTSS. We'll talk about that here in a little bit, but I added that one so that we could have two different strategies to look at once we get into the portfolio. And then once we did that, we finally get to the strategy implementation. And this is where we are going to pick up today. So that was our little background. I think we're all caught up to all the work that we've done so far at the last 3 sessions. And I want to first just demonstrate a little bit about this piece on the top. And then I want to continue some conversation that we started last time about strategy implementation guides. And I think that it is just absolutely imperative that for every strategy that we put into place, that we really focus on these strategy implementation guides. So let's just talk about the top here, and then we'll get into the strategy implementation guide. So for every strategy, you can select one owner for that strategy. In this case, we're going to say that Bill is the owner of it. You'll also select when it starts and when it will be complete. If you don't make any changes to this, it will automatically put the start date as today and the completion date as the date that you complete your goal. So if this is going to be a long-term strategy that you're putting into place, like using the HSAT, then you can just kind of go with the defaults on that. The next thing that you do is you are going to decide and select which of the buildings in your district that this might apply to. And so you might have center-based programs, you may have credit recovery programs, or there's just lots of different programs that you might have, buildings and programs in your district. And so you can decide, is this for everybody? If you did that, you can just select all that are active. Or you could go through and say, this one is really for our elementary school, our high school, and our middle school, for example. So maybe this isn't really for an after-school program or our early college program or things like that. So for our purposes today, I'm going to say this is for our elementary, middle, and high school. You're always welcome to select all active if it's going to be something that applies to everybody. So the next step would be to add activities, and we're going to come back to this after we talk a little bit more about strategy implementation guides. So I'm going to go ahead and minimize this a little bit. And we're really getting into our first outcome for the day now. We're kind of just caught up on the previous work we've done. And we're going to get into strategies, activities, funding, and communicating in this outcome. And the first thing we're going to talk about is the strategy implementation guides. And we're also going to talk about activity planning tools before we get into funding and communicating. So just wanted to really quickly talk about this differentiation between strategies and activities. And last time we did a little warm-up activity where people kind of put in their own definitions. And you can see what everybody said about that on our dashboard. It's linked right here, the participant responses to last week's prompt. So if you wanted to see what everybody was kind of thinking about strategies and activities, you can go there. But the definitions that come right out of the process guide are where we talk about strategies. The roadmap, the strategies are the roadmap to achieving the goal, and the strategies include the specific actions that the adults will take, including what they'll do, who will take them, by when, and what fidelity of implementation looks like. So strategies are, you can't just say something like, well, we're going to do this, right? There's a lot that goes into it. We're going to talk about that with the strategy implementation guides. And the difference between strategies and activities, well, the activities are the actual actions that we're going to take to implement the strategy. And those actions are inclusive of getting ready or installation, implementing, monitoring, adjusting, and evaluating. And so we'll talk about each of those as well. But for right now, let's get into the strategy implementation guides. So this is a template of what the strategy implementation guide looks like. And this is linked right off of our dashboard under the strategy resources. We also have directions here about how to fill this out and the template. And then I did make one for our HSAT implementation, and we'll kind of use that as an example to work through. But we are very fortunate to have the creators of the strategy implementation guide with us. So if you look down at the bottom, Lisa Sarro from Acoma ISD and Ben, who previously at Kent ISD, but now with MDE, we're the ones that made these strategy implementation guides and some of the other resources that we're going to talk about today. And I was talking with Lisa a little bit, and there was a few things that she wanted to make sure that I kind of go over with everybody about these strategy implementation guides. And I thought it was some really great background knowledge on it. When you're making a strategy implementation guide, what you do is you come in and you fill out the critical component. So, and there's going to be multiple critical components likely for any strategy that you put into place. And really what this describes is how that component contributes to the overall outcome of the practice. Then you have this gold standard for what would you really see if you implemented that critical component well. And the main thing to remember about these first two is we really want to have the components in there and the gold standards for what the research says is going to make a difference for us. And that's where the strategy bank tries to do a really good job of identifying what the research is and finding those ESSA levels and those other pieces. And so what does the research say are these critical components, and what does the research say is what that looks like when you're implementing it well. The acceptable variation portion here is really about scaffolding. So it's not to say something like, let's say that the research said that your team needed to meet monthly to review a specific data source. Well, an acceptable variation wouldn't be, well, let's meet every other month, right? If the gold standard is that you're supposed to meet monthly, and it wouldn't really be an acceptable variation to say, well, let's meet quarterly or every other month. If the research says you're supposed to meet monthly, then you have to figure out how to meet monthly. So an acceptable variation might be, well, you know what, the whole team isn't going to get together. We're going to have a subgroup that works on this. So that might be an example of an acceptable variation. And then of course, the unacceptable variation would be the things like saying, well, let's just meet quarterly, or let's just not have the team meet at all. let's just select the strategy, right? So so those are a few things that in my conversation with Lisa that we really want to touch on. A final thing is that this is really about the adults. So we're really saying, what do the adults do here? A lot of times we want to talk about student outcomes and things like that, and we definitely do that with our end targets, interim targets. The strategy implementation guide is all about what do the adults do, and when the adults do that, what does it really look like? So the way that Lisa put it is it's written in the adult voice. So I think that those are just some of the main things that that I know that that she and Ben thought of when they were putting that into place. And Lisa and Ben, I just wanted to stop to check to see if there was anything that you might add. And Frank, could you please make Lisa a co-host so that she could reply to? Sorry, I forgot about that earlier. All right, Lisa, you're welcome to unmute if you had anything that you'd like to add at this time.
I think the only thing that I would add is the beauty of the strategy implementation guide is for the implementers to be the key piece of creating the implementation guide. It really helps with ownership and the idea of studying the research to really understand what the intent of the researchers is, and so that they really have a grasp on what it looks like and feels like, because this helps the entire team or those staff members that are implementing the critical components at the gold standard really be able to articulate and develop instructional practices that support the work. I think that's the only other thing I would say.
And Dave, the only thing I would add is that this really defines fidelity. So later on, when you are monitoring for fidelity, whether that's personal monitoring, whether that's small group monitoring, whether that's external monitoring, this really is critical to defining what that fidelity is. So that's all I would add to that.
Thank you both. And we are definitely going to be getting into that monitoring piece. So I'll look forward to maybe hearing back from both of you when we get into that monitoring a little bit later. So I wanted to talk about the HSAT a little bit, and maybe what would a strategy implementation guide look like for a district that we're putting that healthy school action tool into place. So this obviously isn't meant to be a PD around the HSAT, but I thought it might be instructive to talk about what were some of the critical components, gold standards, and acceptable variations for that healthy school action tool, which is what we selected as our main strategy that we wanted to put into place for this. And so I sat down with our health consultant here at the Muskegon ISD, and we filled out the strategy implementation guide for this. And I have to agree with Lisa, like after I was done with this, I was like, I really feel like I would know what it took to put this into place and to do it well. Where before, if I just said, yeah, let's do this, we wouldn't have been able to really define that. And like Ben mentioned, we wouldn't know what fidelity looked like. And so filling this out was, it honestly did not take very long, but it was a really great conversation that I was able to have with our health consultant. And I would also add that I've done this with other teams, and the teams have always really been appreciative of this work when they got done with it, for the reasons that Lisa and Ben mentioned. So let's just go ahead and talk about what we ended up with here for the Healthy School Action Tool. So the three critical components that we found when we reviewed the tool were that we needed to have an inclusive building level teams for each building that was participating in this strategy. So we mentioned that we were going to do this at our elementary, middle, and high school. So our critical component is we need to have these inclusive building level teams. Another critical component was that those teams have to complete the HSAT assessment responsibilities. So you can't just jump straight into planning on this. There's assessment responsibilities that go along with it. And then the final critical component that we identified was that teams needed to meet at least quarterly to plan, implement, and monitor the HSAT. So what was the gold standard for this? So the gold standard for our building level teams was that, that we wanted the HSAT team to be the same as the school leadership team that completes a continuous improvement process for the school. And that was because we really wanted our HSAT plan to be our MICIP plan. So at a minimum, the team would include the building administrator, a behavioral health representative, a health educator, and a physical educator. So when we worked across, so what would be an acceptable variation to this, right? If we wanted to make sure that this was a representative team. And so we thought, you know what, an acceptable variation would be that there was a separate HSAT team that wasn't necessarily the same as the school leadership team, but it still really needed to include those required members. And if they did that, then the team would have to stay in two-way communication with school leadership. So to us, that was an acceptable variation. It was still an inclusive building level team that had the required people on it, but maybe it just didn't need to be the exact same as the school leadership team. So I'm just going to work through just one more of these. I don't want to talk through the entire thing, but just for everybody to get a good idea about it. So this next critical component was that the teams would complete the HSAT assessment responsibilities. So our gold standard was that the core assessment was completed by the HSAT team at least annually. And then based on the results of the core assessment, we had multiple topic area assessments that were identified and completed. So that was our gold standard. And our acceptable variation was that the core assessment is completed by the full HSAT team. And then the topic area assessments could be completed by subgroups that brought that information back to the full team for feedback. So maybe we didn't need to have the full team involved in the topic area assessments. Maybe we were able to narrow that down to some people that had some expertise in the area of the topic area assessments. So we then did the same thing for meeting at least quarterly to plan, implement, and monitor. So like I said, when we finished this, it really gave us some great ideas for what would this really look like to put this strategy in place? What kind of time commitment is this going to be for people? What are the people on the team really going to have to do? And what are the outcomes from their work going to be? And you'll see later when we get into into our monitoring portion, we'll really be able to use this to help us decide on what does the fidelity of that monitoring look like. So I'm going to just pause there, and I'm just kind of checking the chat. Anybody on the team, was there anything, any questions that maybe came up about this specifically?
Not right now, Dave, and I think every question that was posed in the chat has been answered, and any resources people had have been put in the repository.
Great.
Dave, if I could just, I'm sorry, quickly add one more thing
Please.
I thought of. So ideally, the folks who are going to be actually implement this would be involved in the design of it. If that's not practical, so if you're going to have an entire grade level or an entire school implement it, that may not be practical, but it's really critical that once it is developed, everybody who will be implementing it have a clear understanding and have the same understanding of what each of these components looks like. So I just wanted to add that.
Yep, thanks, Ben. So again, we're going to come back to this when we get into the monitoring, but for every strategy that you put into place, I highly recommend that you complete a strategy implementation guide. It's really going to give you critical information for what you're going to need to know for how to put it into place. And it'll actually be very helpful when it comes to selecting your activities as well. So that is actually the next thing that I want to talk about was our activity planning tool. So I'm just going to pop back to MICIP real quick to kind of just give us a feel for where we are right now. So you'll see that there's that whole step of really coming up with the strategy implementation guide and that sort of thing. It's not explicitly a part of MICIP. So that process is not built into MICIP. And like we've talked about in several other places, and we'll talk about it more, a lot of the work that happens around continuous improvement happens outside of MICIP. So MICIP is our tool, but it is not the entire process. And so a lot of these pieces, how the teams operate, the sorts of work that the teams do happens outside of MICIP. And so you'll see there's not a spot for strategy implementation guides here, but I really feel that it's a critical piece of this. It's in the process guide. And I think that it's definitely worth doing with your teams before you get to the spot where you decide what activities that you put into place. So that's actually our next step, is to add those activities. So similar to the strategy implementation guides, there's also an activity planning tool. And this is, I've used this for years and years, back from when Ben was at Kent ISD, and I stole it from him from a meeting that I was at with him. And this is just such a great tool, and it's gotten better and better over the years. So there are some questions at the top that really get into each of these stages of the sorts of activities that you'll put into place. So you'll see that these are categorized. You can have getting ready activities, implementation activities, monitoring and adjusting activities, and evaluation activities. And you'll see that for monitor and adjust, they're kind of broken into two categories. There's the fidelity of implementation, right? That's what the adults are doing. And also there's the impact on students. And so you'll see that there's kind of two types of monitoring and adjusting and two types of evaluation activities that you can write. So then it has some main questions below that. And then it actually gives some examples of some possible activities. So if you are working on putting some activities in place, I really recommend thinking about, well, what categories of activity are we putting in place as we're putting these activities in for our strategies? And as you'll see here in a minute, I actually label those in MICIP. So I'll talk about that here in a minute. But this tool is just, it's excellent. And it really gets you to think about specific questions as you're choosing each of the activities. So I just wanted to pause for a minute to see if Lisa or Ben had anything to add before I show my example of what we put together around the HSAT.
The only thing I think I would emphasize is this strategy implementation guide and the activity planning tool work together in tandem. And while you take the time with the implementers to really study the research, because those first two columns stick to that research, you really use the phases of getting ready, implementation, monitoring, and evaluating to help guide the activities that would help you with a rollout that would be inclusive of each of those phases, to really think through them by having that SIG in place prior. It really begins to be a roadmap for understanding the comprehensiveness of a rollout for a strategy. So it also, when you've identified those activities, it allows you to really look at the length of time needed to spend in getting ready, to really think about what is it that needs to happen around the readiness of those implementing, and then what knowledge and skills are determined for the people that are implementing based on what they will need to do with students directly. So always having that lens for what the expectation for students and that learning capacity. And the same thing for opportunity. You spend some time looking at what might be the structures or the parameters or the supports that need to be in place by administration to support the implementers throughout implementing this. And it gives you that grace to think about how much time will it take to get implementers ready. Perhaps you're just doing an initial installment and you get a group of people started, but then you go back to full scale, and you always can readdress what other readiness activities might need to happen before you implement. And like Ben was talking about, it's so key. What are the mechanisms for monitoring based off of what's required in the SIG of those stakeholders that are implementing? So the activities is your roadmap. And it doesn't mean that you're beginning each of those phases all at once sometimes. And as you move through it in later years, the dates will change, and you may add pieces to bring something to full scale. So I just wanted to remind people of that.
And maybe just one other quick thing, Dave. So we have the term possible there. Again, emphasis that these are not all required. And depending on your strategy, you may be at different places with different strategies based on where the level of implementation is. And then just maybe one other thing. With the HEX tool, you were asked to evaluate your capacity. If your capacity is on the lower end, but you still think that you have enough capacity to move forward, especially if you consider building in some of these activities in those areas where your capacity isn't where it needs to be, but eventually you could get there. So just a consideration of the tie between the HEX tool, especially the capacity piece, and potential activities.
Thank you both very much. And thanks for your work on this really great tool. So I'm going to go ahead and show an example then. If, as a reminder, we filled out our whole strategy implementation guide. And then that brings us to, so what would be some of the activities that we might do for this? And so what we put in under getting ready was that one of the things that we would like to do would be to establish quarterly administration level meetings with the ISD health consultant to help us to better understand this whole process with the HSAT. Another getting ready piece was that we wanted to establish building HSAT teams and monthly meeting schedules. So that kind of falls under this systems area, where the first one with meeting with the ISD health consultant really fell under the knowledge and skills area. So those were a couple of things that we thought of that we might want to do as we were getting ready to put this strategy into place. And then under implementation, we wanted to make sure that we completed the core assessment as part of our implementation and the topic area assessments. And then our third implementation activity that we were going to enter in is that we wanted to establish HSAT activities based on the core and topic area assessments. And so we kind of set some timelines for when we wanted those to happen. There's an actual monitoring plan built into the HSAT. And so we've just, as far as the monitoring and adjusting piece, we put in that we would want to follow the HSAT's monitoring plan for the 3 critical components starting in the 21-22 school year. And this might be one of those pieces, like Lisa and Ben were saying, is they kind of get fleshed out more as we learn more. And so again, this is a flexible process where you can kind of come back and make adjustments as you learn more. Finally, under evaluation, we talked about evaluating the impact using our interim measures that were identified in the MICIP portfolio. We would want to do that annually. We'd want to evaluate the fidelity of the implementation by looking at the improvements to the HSAT core and topic area assessments. And we'd like to evaluate the fidelity of the implementation using the strategy monitoring plan. So we would want to go back and look, did we do these things? Did we complete these pieces? Did we meet at least quarterly? Did we, do we have these inclusive teams with the correct people on them? And so there's a lot of, I would say, back and forth communication or work between the strategy implementation guide and the activity planning tool. So those were some of the activities that we thought up to go with our strategy of putting that healthy school action tool into place. So what does that look like in MICIP? Down here under the strategy implementation activities, basically what I would do is I would take each of these activities I identify on our planning tool, and I would make an activity for them here. So I'm just going to add a couple of them just so you can see what that looks like. And then as we get into some breakout rooms here in a few minutes, I will, I'll put the rest of them in. So you don't have to watch me put in like those 8 or 10 activities, but I'll just add a couple just to kind of show what it looks like. So we come into our activity, and our first one was a getting ready activity. And that one was about establishing the quarterly administration level meetings with the ISD health consultant. So I'm going to go ahead and paste that in there. And I really like just putting getting ready right at the start of it. It really helps me to understand which one of these, which activity am I putting into place. And for this one, we want to make sure that we had this one done. I think we identified having this done by the end of August. So if everybody remembers our little pro tip from last time, if you click on the year, you can select which year it is. And if you click on the month, you can select which month we're talking about. And so we said that we wanted to have this done by the end of August. So I'm going to go ahead and, I just want to also remind everybody that you can assign this to different people. So in this case, maybe it's one of the principals that's going to reach out to the health consultant, make sure we get this set up, or, maybe it's a curriculum director or somebody else might be reaching out. So in this case, it's going to be poor Bill Barnes that gets all kinds of these things assigned to him. So we're going to go ahead and save that activity, and I'll add just one more. And I will add in our other getting ready activity, which was that we wanted to establish our building HSAT teams and monthly meeting schedule. So I popped that one in there. We're going to assign that one to Bill as well. And this one, we said that we were going to have that ready by the end of September. So that kind of gets us caught up with that in MICIP. I want to talk, before we get into breakout rooms, I do want to talk briefly about funding and communication. So I'm going to just pop back over to our presentation for that. So a few things about the funding. I've been getting quite a few questions about the funding section. So as we've talked about before, the funding is really just for our planning purposes. And so that doesn't get pulled over into MICIP. So those strategies that we identified and the activities that we identified do become drop downs in Nexus. The funding is just for planning purposes. And another question I get is, are we supposed to fill out that funding every year, or how does it work? And it's really set up in MICIP to be representative of the total funding of all the activities that you're putting in for the life of that strategy. So it's really, you are going to have to think of more detailed budget items. Each activity probably has its own budget. There's a lot of things to kind of think about, and it's really here. Why is it set up like this? It's really to try to get us to think about this concept of blending and braiding funds. That is one of those mindset shifts with continuous improvement. And today is not a day to really get into the financial side of things, but I did want to at least give some operational definitions for what blending and braiding funds are. So blending funds occurs when you have various funding sources that are coming into a strategy, and you can actually pull those funding sources into one set of reporting requirements. And I don't have any examples to share of that right now, but just wanted to give an operational definition for what that is. If somebody has a great example, you're welcome to put it into chat. And blending is different than braiding, which is where you are going to be using various funding sources for the strategy, but they still keep their same specific identity and the reporting requirements. I think that one is one that everybody is a little bit more familiar with. There's lots of times that we have to fund things from various sources, but we still have to stick with the requirements of whatever Title II is asking for, or Title III or 31A, where blending gives us the capability to put things into one set of reporting requirements. Although that this capability has been here for a long time, there's been some more recent guidance that's coming out about this. And so I'm looking forward to learning more about that as we go forward. But really that funding section is set up to think broadly, big picture. What are all the different ways that we could fund this? How much do we think it's going to cost? And what are the various kind of funding schemes that we might come up with to be able to put this into place that makes sense? So, right, the needs, plans, funds piece of MICIP. So what does that look like? Really, it's just check boxes and an overall total funding piece. I really anticipate that people are going to need to be maintaining a lot of their own budget spreadsheets and those sorts of things. You're going to need a lot more detail when you get into Nexus. So this is really for just broad planning purposes. What are the main ways that we might think about funding this? So we might say, we're going to need some professional learning around this. We might be needing to hire some staff to be able to implement some of these pieces. Maybe that would come out of, say, 31A. I know that there's going to be a large general fund commitment to this. So again, I'm not making a budget for it. I'm just kind of demonstrating this and getting you to think about what are some of those big picture pieces that we might need to consider as we're putting the strategy into place. So we'll estimate right now that over the life of this 4 years that we're going to be putting this place, maybe this is going to cost us about $500,000 to put into place. And the very last step that we're going to take before we actually add this to the MICIP portfolio is to talk about how to communicate the strategy. And so the communication setup here is really just to get your team thinking about how you're going to communicate internally and externally. And again, it's just some check boxes. So the conversation, the creation of a communication plan, all that kind of stuff has to happen outside of MICIP. Making budget spreadsheets, those sorts of things. That has to happen outside of MICIP. So this is just a place to get you thinking about it, to get you, give you some prompts for some conversation that you might have to have about it. And so for our plan, really would want to think about how do those building teams that are working on the HSAT, how are we going to continue and lift that work up to our district communication team, or excuse me, our district continuous improvement team would be a really important piece, because the HSAT is a building initiative. It's not a district initiative. So how would we take all those different building initiatives that we're putting in place with the HSAT and lift that up to our district improvement team? So that might be a communication consideration that we would have in this case. So here we might say that, you know what, we are going to make sure that we do monthly presentations to our staff when we come into our, when we come into our continuous improvement meetings. So at this time, what we would do is we can go ahead and add that to our MICIP portfolio. We can't quite do it yet because you can see that our Healthy School Action Tools is ready. So you get a green check mark that says it's ready to add to the portfolio. Our other one that I want to add in here is not quite ready yet, and I'm going to get this ready while you guys are in breakouts so that I can kind of show what the portfolio looks like. Okay, so let's talk about some breakout choices. So we are going to get into breakouts, and I wanted to give two options. In about, we're going to try to come back together at about 10:10-ish. So there's about 50 minutes that are available here. And if your team would really like to spend a little bit of an extended time on working through MICIP so far, then you're welcome to use that entire 50 minutes or so to get together with your team and really dig into things, start talking about strategies and activities, and wherever you left off with the MICIP process is fine. So teams can have some extended time. If your team would like to come back, we're going to give everybody at least 20 minutes. So after that 20 minutes is up, we'll send a message. Frank will put out a message saying, hey, whoever would like to come back to learn more about our next step, which is implementing, monitoring, adjusting, evaluating, then you'd be invited back after 20 minutes. So everybody's going to go out for at least 20 minutes. Your team could then decide, hey, we want to stay here and continue working as a team. Or you might say, let's go back and kind of close out and see what it looks like once we're in the portfolio. There's some great information that we're going to go over in that about half hour or so. We will be recording it. So if you stay in your group, you can always come back and watch the recording. Maybe you send one person out to watch that and report back to the group. But it's going to be a really good presentation. But we know that that team collaboration time is really important too, from the feedback that we were getting. So those are your options, and just know that section is going to get recorded. So before we go into the breakouts, I just wanted to point out that I do have some, just on our second page here of our dashboard, I do have some just your breakout instructions. So if you're an established team that's here with your district or your ISD, you're welcome to dig into the work that we're talking about today, or just continue where you left off previously. And then if you're in one of our kind of collaborative groups that got put together here, then this would be a great time to talk about those things we talked about today: strategy implementation guides, the activity planning tools, and just where are your districts for those things. So that is what is on our instructions here. And there's also instructions about how to get into the training site if you wanted to mess around in the training site. Okay, so Frank is going to go ahead and open up the rooms. I know that he's probably has lots of us put into the rooms already, so you may just be called straight to your room. And you might also have the option of selecting your own room. And so to do that, you'll click the little breakout room icon that will be down on your bar. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And from there, I recommend minimizing this little unassigned triangle and then going to your breakout room. And we do have the previous breakout rooms that people were in the in our sign-in form. So Frank, anything that you would add before we open up the rooms?
Thanks, Dave. I tried to.
All right, so we are back for our outcome 2, which is we're going to talk about working in the MICIP portfolio. And so we're going to talk about implementing, monitoring, adjusting, and evaluating. So I'm going to pop back over to MICIP. And while everybody was out in their breakouts, I went ahead and added the rest of our activities for our HSAT strategy. So we have all of our getting ready, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation activities are entered for our HSAT activity. I also went in and have our kind of demo MTSS one, and you'll see why I wanted to have 2 strategies here in a minute. So basically, when you get a green ready check on all of your strategies, so you can see that there was a ready check on our HSAT, there's a ready check next to our MTSS, then that is going to light up your add to MICIP portfolio button. So I'm going to go ahead and hit that. And so it kind of gives you, just saying, do you really want to add these? So adding the strategies to the portfolio commits the district to the strategy implementation plan outlined, and adding the strategy to the portfolio will create opportunities to review, monitor, and evaluate the progress. And it does point out that strategies can be edited and removed at any time. And I'm going to talk about that because that's come up a couple of times. There was a specific question about that today, and I've had several people email me about that. Can you go back and edit things? And the answer is yes. So I'll try to get into that today too. So I'm going to say, okay, I'm ready, add it to the portfolio. And when I do that, we will see that our goal gets added to the active goals section of the portfolio. And so a couple things about this is you can see that we could click to go to our upcoming strategies that we're working on. We could look at our evaluation interim measures, and we can look at our evaluation end target measures. And right now it says that we're on target for those. If we were starting to get over dates on those, we would get some other messages. But right here, you can see that we contain 2 strategies. So in our improved student engagement and social emotional outcomes, there are 2 strategies here. So I click the plus sign, and I can see that we have our healthy school actions tool, which is what we've been working on today. And then it also lists out our MTSS one that is just a practice that I put in. And we can see that this was assigned to our elementary, middle, and high school. And we can also see all of the different implementation activities. And we have several of them. So there's 2 pages of those that we could kind of tab through to see that. We could look down and we can see that there's a total funding of 500,000, and it's coming out of Title II, 31A, and General Fund, and that we're going to do some presentations to staff around our strategy communication. So basically, that's what it looks like once it gets into the portfolio. Again, I could click this to see all of our the different activities that we're trying to put into place, and we can go to see what our end targets and interim targets. If I recall correctly, whichever one you click on, it shows both. So yep. So we can see our interim measures and our end target measures. So I just wanted to kind of talk about what that looks like when it's in MICIP. And so that's kind of a full walkthrough of what's in the portfolio. If you just remember to make sure that you click on the plus sign, then you can pretty much see everything. You can go in, you can look at your specific end targets and interim targets for each of those activities. All right, so I want to go back to the presentation and talk through a few things. We already really talked about the implementation. That really has everything to do with your implementation guide. So if I wanted to know what I'm supposed to do to implement this strategy, I would go back and I would look at my implementation guide, and I would use my activity planning tool, right? So these are the things that I know that I'm supposed to be doing to put this into place. And this is why I really, really, really recommend that you do complete a strategy implementation guide and an activity planning tool for all of your strategies and activities. If you don't do that, there's really no mechanism in MICIP that says, now you're supposed to do this, now you're supposed to do this. You know, I mean, it really goes back to what did your team decide were those critical components in the gold standard, and then you really have to hold your team to it. Yes, it will give you due dates on upcoming activities, but there's really, right now, there's not a mechanism that's built into MICIP that really allows for you to track your implementation. So when it comes to implementation, it's all about that work that your team does with your strategy implementation guides and your activity planning tools. So I really can't stress enough that I really think everybody should do this and really scope out the work and be able to monitor that on yourself, because it's not going to just happen for you in MICIP. That's our tool, but it's not going to make it do it for us. I would say the same thing about monitoring. So let's talk about monitoring a little bit. Monitoring to me is probably the most important step. And it's all about what are you, how are you monitoring what you're putting into place? And then what are you doing about that monitoring? So there's really kind of two steps, monitoring and adjusting, right? So I'm about to unveil Dave's super awesome monitoring and adjusting flowchart. Okay, so it's called the DSAMAFC for short. So let's talk about this. So if you remember, under monitoring and adjusting, there was monitoring for fidelity, and then there was monitoring for impact. Okay, so we kind of start up here at did we do it? So this is where we're really monitoring for fidelity. So did we do whatever it was that we said that we were going to put into place? So if the answer is not yet, then really have to start to think about, okay, did we not do it because there was some sort of organizational hurdle? Or did we not do it because there was some sort of know-how hurdle? And if it's an organizational hurdle, then that's a systems piece that we really need to work on. Oh, you know what? We didn't do the HSAT this year because we never set up the original team. Okay, well, that was an organizational hurdle. We just didn't set the team up. We really need to think about, well, how can we make it so that we can get this team together, right? And so you try to fix that, and you kind of can go back to the did we do it step. Or you might have a know-how hurdle. Well, we put the team together, but we didn't have any idea how to move forward after that point. We didn't know how to do this core thing. We didn't know how to do these activity things. And okay, well, that was a know-how hurdle. We didn't know how to do that. So we needed to get in touch with our ISD health consultant and have her walk us through how to do that, right? So you might need to get some sort of professional learning. Maybe we need to get coached along with that, or some other external support to help us with that. So there's a lot of reasons why something might not, why you might not have done it, right? So that fidelity piece, and likely it's either an organizational issue or it's a know-how issue. So, so then we kind of pop back up to did we do it? All right, let's say we cleared up these issues here, and yes, we actually put it into place. So then the question really is, okay, is it working? And so this gets into that impact side of things. And if the answer is not yet, then it comes back over to these same questions, right? Is there something organizationally that's getting in the way of that? Is there something with our know-how that's getting in the way of that? But if it is work, if our answer is yes, then we can start to get into, okay, have we met our targets yet? And if we met all of our targets, then we're ready to complete the evaluation. If we haven't yet met the target, then we continue monitoring. And I didn't draw in one big nasty arrow, but really there could be an arrow that goes all the way back up to did we do it, right? So really this is just kind of I kind of put it in jest, but just kind of a way to think about this monitoring piece. Monitoring is it's just so important, and you really have to think about the fidelity side of monitoring and the impact side of monitoring. And so hopefully this might just kind of get you pointed in the right direction about how you might do that. So there's a great tool that was designed by Lisa and Ben that goes along with your strategy implementation guide. And I have that all linked off of our dashboard. And so right here under monitoring, we have a strategy implementation monitoring plan template. So let's open that up and see what that is all about.
Hey, Faith, where is the
Hello. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom in on this. And so what this does is it takes those first two columns off of our strategy implementation guide, right? The critical component and the gold standard. And it zeroes in on it to say, you know, let's put our critical components and our gold standards. And then it really gets into the monitoring piece. How are we going to monitor the fidelity of implementation? And then who and where is this going to happen? And when are we going to do that? And how are we going to share this out? So these first two are all about, or excuse me, the first four columns here are all about the fidelity of implementation. And then finally, the last column is about monitoring the effectiveness. So what is going on? What's the evidence that we have that this is making a difference for our student achievement? And so you basically take your critical components and your gold standards, and then again, with your team, you work through the rest of this piece and really understand how we're going to monitor this, who's going to do it, when are we going to do it, and how are we going to share the results out? And finally, what would that look like for student achievement if this was happening? And I know that I've said already that the strategy implementation guides and activity planning tools are critical steps. This is really that last critical step. There's nothing in MICIP that's going to make you do this. And so this is a great tool to be able to do this. I know that there are, if you're working with other improvement frameworks, such as if you're working in Blueprint or you're working with MyMTSS, they have a lot of their own tools that allow for these sorts of things. So this is definitely not the only way that you can do this, but I think that it's a great way to do it. And it's already connected to all the pieces in MICIP as far as it's in the process guide. But again, there's really no mechanism in MICIP to do this. So there's not like a click this button to monitor, right? This all has to happen outside of MICIP. I know that they're working on adding in some additional monitoring pieces. There was a survey that was sent out recently to some of the key stakeholders around the state that had us prioritize what some of the different pieces are that we might want to see in future releases. And in talking with Terry, I know that there are some pieces in the works to try to work in some other monitoring pieces that will ask us some of these sorts of questions, and we can document some of those answers in MICIP. But as of right now, that's not in there. And so I would really plan on trying to get this put in place for your teams to work out as they start to go through this over the next year. So I'm going to pause there to see if I didn't see if Lisa popped back into this part of the session. If Lisa had anything to add, or if Ben had anything to add. And just to answer Holly's question in chat, the resources are linked on our dashboard, and they are all linked in the process guide as well. So they're on our dashboard under monitoring.
I'll just reiterate, Dave, that yes, we are in the process of designing a section right in MICIP that will allow you to enter your documentation right into the platform itself. But you're right, as far as the specific tools, they're linked in the process guide, but they're not specifically in MICIP. The other piece is that, and I know you're going to be moving on to the evaluation piece, but there is a tool for evaluation in MICIP, and one of the tools for monitoring will align very well with that, because basically monitoring is the ongoing process that ends with evaluation. And it's the same thing, that it's the formative process for ending at evaluation. So those two tools will explicitly align. There's also a tool, this particular tool is broken down by key elements of the key components of the strategy. There's also a summary tool that we've developed, I think is linked in the guide for today also, yep. Right? That if a leader, for example, is going through, and it's strictly for monitoring, it's not for evaluation, but it's a tool that a leader can use to walk through, say, the building and observe implementation taking place and identifying which elements are seeming to be in place, which of those are not, and can set up professional learning based on that tool. So this is a kind of a complementary tool to go with the very detailed one that Dave shared.
Thanks, Ben. So yes, and so that tool is linked in here. That is the third one under monitoring. And so this is where you can actually, if this is our plan of what we're going to do, this was how we actually monitored. So a lot of times, and this was something that I happened a lot with school improvement teams that I hope is going to be corrected with continuous improvement teams, is the school improvement teams actually had a hard time figuring out what they were supposed to do if they weren't looking at data and making goals. So like, well, what am I supposed to do the rest of the year? And this is what you're supposed to be doing the rest of the year, right? You're supposed to be making sure that the things you said were getting put into place, and then monitoring the fidelity of that and the impact of that. And this is the work. So if all the rest of the stuff that we talked about is the plan, all of this is the work. So what did this look like? I made a strategy implementation monitoring plan for our Healthy School Action Tool example. Again, I will not go through this whole thing. If anybody's curious to see what that looks like, you're welcome to do that. Why don't I just walk through one line of it? And this was the line about making our inclusive building level teams for each of the buildings, right? So how are we going to actually monitor this? Well, we are going to maintain school team roster lists. The curriculum director is going to keep that. And so our curriculum director would have a list of who's on it for our elementary, who's on it for our middle school, who's on it for our high school. We'd be able to make sure that we are able to look at that to see that it has those key players on it that were required. And so that would really be up to the curriculum director to make sure that they're monitoring that by looking back at our team rosters. And then who's getting monitored? Well, the curriculum director is actually monitoring our HSAT teams to make sure that they exist and they have the right people on them, right? So when are we going to do that? We're gonna do that annually by August 30th, because we had said that we wanted to have those teams set up in August every year to make sure that we're ready to go for each year. So the curriculum director is going to monitor that every year in August. How are we going to share that? All the team rosters for all the teams are available on the district shared drive, and they're reviewed at our back to school PD. So I know when I was a building principal, one of the things that I would always do is say, okay, here's what all of our teams are, and here's who's on all the teams. Here's how we're going to communicate. So we would definitely make sure that we do that when we have our back to school PD. Finally, is this piece on the impact. So I put here, as membership and teams change, new members are on board and brought up to speed, and then that our efforts persist through leadership changes. So that's kind of the more ongoing piece to look at that. It's hard to say that just because you have a building level team set up that you can tie that directly to some sort of student achievement. So I have that listed out in some other areas. But for us, some formative assessment would be that we made sure that if leadership changes, the team stayed in place, and that as people leave, new team members are brought on board and brought up to speed. So this would have been my monitoring plan. And like we said, I would, as we complete the monitoring, I would start to fill out, or our team, I should say, would start to fill out this, guide. And like Ben mentioned, there's lots of things that we can say if this is a classroom thing. This is more of a team-based, systems-based strategy. But if this is more of a classroom-based strategy, then you could say what classrooms and grade levels did we visit, and there's all kinds of other things that you can talk about with the monitoring there. So great tools. And I can't stress enough that this is the work that happens in between those small time parts that we're actually doing the plans. And probably the last thing that I'd like to say about this before we get into the evaluation for a few minutes is that this becomes new data. So this monitoring data becomes new data that can be plugged back into your MICIP system to to inform how to move forward with goals. So there aren't mechanisms currently in MICIP. I know that they're being built and feedback's being given on those already. But in the meantime, this is the work that we need to do as we go. All right, so I want to finish up by talking about evaluation. So as we've talked about, the program evaluation tool that used to be a part of Assist no longer exists. And that is because evaluation is built into MICIP. And I'm going to demonstrate that here in just a minute. But what I wanted to point out is that there's a difference between program evaluation for continuous improvement and program evaluation for all of your state and federal programs that would be checked for an on-site review or a fiscal review. If you were to have an on-site review and your Office of Educational Supports rep came in and said, okay, so show me how you're monitoring or evaluating your programs, and you said, oh, we use MICIP, so we're all set, you would get a change required. So we are supposed to evaluate all of our state and federal programming every single year. And as you'll see, the evaluation portion of MICIP happens at the end of a goal, and it's only that you're evaluating that goal. So this does not accomplish what you would need to accomplish for your state and federal programs. So I know we're not here to talk about state and federal programs, but that's part of my job. And I've sat through untold on-site reviews. I've had on-site reviews completed on myself. And even before, when we said, well, here's the PET, that was not enough. And so you have to be able to show how you're evaluating all of your funding from state and federal programs. This does not do that. So don't just assume that because we're doing MICIP that you have accomplished what you need to accomplish for evaluation for an on-site review. So just wanted to point that out real quick. Let's get into MICIP and take a look and see what this evaluation thing is all about. So when we get into MICIP, we have all of our strategies here. And as we're completing these, we can just check them off. Once we complete the strategy, it first lets us know that can't be undone. So you can see that as we're completing strategies, right, we had those we had those quarterly meetings. We set up our teams, so we're getting those things complete, right? But the way that you actually complete goals is not by completing the strategies. It is by completing your interim target measures and end target measures. And you can't complete it until you complete those pieces. So let's go ahead and just complete these so we can see what the evaluation portion looks like. So we're going to say that we hit our 3% interim target. And when you do that, it gives you a little super happy fun party thing. And we're going to do the same thing for our end target measures, just so we can get in and see what the evaluation looks like. And remember, this was a multi-year goal for us, so we wouldn't be completing this until 2024, right? So once we do that, then we're actually able to go to this define impact tool. And there's a pretty great graphic here. And like Ben mentioned earlier, we're going to be able to look at this earlier as we're completing some of our strategies to see what kind of impact or fidelity or scale or reach or capacity that we had for those individual those individual activities. But for now, it's really set up just around the completion of the whole goal. And so we can come in and we can say, we could discuss with the team, how well did we do with our fidelity? How was our scale and reach? How did our capacity improve over this? What impact did it have on students? And so you would actually come in and complete these sections. And when you get to the end, you kind of have two options of what you can do. You can say, yes, we met our goal, or no, we didn't meet our goal. And then there's options about what you might want to do under that. And currently, you can't revise the goal yet, I don't believe. I think it gives a message that says that this is a future thing that it will be able to do. but you can abandon it and archive it if you wanted to. So you could say, you know, we've kind of moved into a different direction. We think that some other things are important, you know, that sorts of thing. Frank, if you could give about a 2-minute warning to the people that are still in. Thanks. But you can also say that, yes, we met the goal. And if you met the goal and you're completely done with it, you're ready to completely move on to in a different direction, then you could move that goal right to the archive. And then it would actually it'll show up kind of in an archive section. But you can also move a goal to maintenance. So let's say that this was working on the HSAT has become a part of our culture, and we're always going to have an HSAT team, and we're always going to be digging into this stuff, no matter what other kind of goals that we have. Well, then we would move that into a maintenance goal. So I'm going to go ahead and say, let's put this into maintenance. And from here, what you would want to do is maybe just to kind of talk about why did we move this into maintenance, and what is it that we're going to do to continue working through this. And so you would enter in some information about that, and you'd say save and move to maintenance. And when we do that, you'll see that now we don't have any more active goals. Now we do have this one maintenance goal. And we can still go through, we could still continue any unfinished strategies that we had or anything like that. So I know that was a little bit of a whirlwind there at the end. These things are years out for lots of us. So I wanted to kind of do this from a begin with an end in mind type thing. You could just see the whole process from beginning to end. So as Frank is closing up here in the next minute or so, I do want to address this whole idea of going back. And oh my gosh, since I put that into maintenance, I can't show you this. Darn it. As one of the main questions that we've had, and I said I was going to address it today, and now I'm not going to be able to do it, is that you can go back at any point while it's still active. You can go back at any point and edit the previous areas. So I might just go ahead and make a separate little video about that and add it to our playlist. But you can go back, you can edit your strategy. You can add activities. If you accidentally check an activity off and say, oh my gosh, I shouldn't have done that, you could go back and make a new version of that. You can take the monitoring data that we just had and go all the way back to data discovery and upload it as a new data discovery piece. So there's you have complete flexibility to go back and make adjustments based off of the new information that's come in, new data that has come in, or based off of your monitoring. So gosh, I'm sorry that I forgot to show everybody that before I added it to maintenance. So I'm going to try to make a note, maybe if my team members can remind me to make a little video about how can you go back and make those edits. And I will go back and demonstrate that on a video. So sorry about that. All right, so we're going to have everybody else back in about 30 seconds, and then we will go ahead and wrap things up for our series. Holly, looks like Holly got her question answered. Any other questions that might have come up from the team that didn't get answered in chat?
No, I don't think so. I mean,
additional guidance in there. Oh, I'm sorry. Who am I talking over? I apologize.
I think we're good. Mike, you said that Ben added a couple of just some additional guidance and points.
Correct.
Great. All right, I think we're all back. Great. So we're just going to go ahead and get things wrapped up here in the next few minutes. Just a few things that I wanted to go over to kind of tie things all back together. So this graphic is just right out of the process guide. And I think it gives a really nice overview of the whole process. So this first part, this assess needs portion, you know, it goes back all the way to where we started the very beginning of the process, where your team really starts to think about what is it that we really want to dig into, and then what kind of data is going to be important to us. That's where we wrote our data story. We did the root cause, and finally developed our challenge statement. So that all comes up in this assess needs portion. Then we moved into the planning portion, where we defined our goal. and our added our end and interim target measures. And this is also where you can add tasks. We selected a strategy. Our practice strategy was that HSAT, the Healthy School Action Tool. We really got into the details on that with our strategy implementation guide. We identified our activities with our activity planning tool. And we also talked today about funding and communicating. And then finally is this implement, monitor, and evaluate. And to me, if I were to draw this to scale, this assess needs and plan portion would be very small. And this implement, monitor, and evaluate would take up a very large portion of, like if we were going to try to scope out like a timeline or how much time is allocated to each of these things. This implement, monitor, and adjust is the work, right? So the assessing needs and the planning is just your planning for this. This is the work, and the work takes much longer to complete. You can take a lot of this implementation and monitoring data, and you can plug it all the way back in at your data stories. And you can make adjustments to your plan as you're monitoring and adjusting. So just to say that, this shows it to be kind of linear, and also, it doesn't try to show any kind of proportionality. It's definitely a much more nonlinear process, and the proportionality of implementing, monitoring, and adjusting is much greater. I also wanted to see if Mike, I'm going to put you on the spot for this one, Mike. Mike made a really nice graphic just about how things are organized, and it makes for a nice way to kind of talk through that process. And Mike, if you wouldn't mind just taking a couple minutes to kind of do that.
No, not at all. Is what I attempted to do is, because the MICIP platform is really focused at a systems level, i.e. the district, is that sometimes we have to start with the end in mind in terms of what does our team structure look like? This is not about who's on the team. This would be after the teams are assembled, how they communicate with one another. So starting at the very top, you notice the colored figures. Those colored figures represent people that are from the individual building level teams, which are at the very bottom. So for example, I just colored the yellow people. Those are central office. The blues are representative building administration at the school level. And then the beige people are specific team members that come from the individual building teams. You can't have one massive district team. You know how that is. It's like 30 people in the room. You're not going to really be able to get it at some tangible goals and then ultimately the results. And currently the MICIP platform is one that where it's not like the Google Doc, one person entering and you can easily overwrite the next person if they have access. So what I attempted to do was, here is the district MICIP team, and they work within the platform. Right underneath that is everybody's engaging in the MICIP process. And probably the key graphic, which kind of goes unnoticed, is that looping arrow, because the communication needs to not only flow up, but it needs to flow down. And I know that Dave touched about communication, not directly, but indirectly in some of the language and the information that came out today. So this particular graphic is about a larger district, because I wanted to showcase what a larger district would look like. So I just went on the internet. I just got some schools and I put those in. So you see that this particular district has 4 elementaries, 1 middle school, and 1 high school. So the district level team assembled their data story, went through all the steps, and ultimately arrived at a goal, and they wanted to increase literacy. So from the 2 literacy components, the graphic on the right is the building-wide K-5 literacy essentials, and the graphic on the left is the 612 disciplinary or content literacy essentials. So that was going to be a K-12 focus, which really lends itself nicely to being a district goal. So once the flow of communication is established using the MICIP process, then once again, it flows up and it flows down, and the necessary adjustments. If we don't communicate with one another, then Dave has mentioned it at various points. If communication breaks down, we're not going to get anywhere on our continuous improvement journey. So that was the intent of the graphic, was to show how you could organize a large district in terms of the team structure to make sure that your continuous improvement is ongoing and continuous. And I'd be glad to entertain any questions regarding that.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
Just nice to have it laid out that way. And we've talked about teams and structures and organization, and I thought this was a great graphic. I appreciate you putting that together. So I just had one last thing that I wanted to talk about. And the context of this is our professional learning that we had in our last 4 sessions that we got together. And but I think that this has impact on the sorts of strategies and activities that we're planning to put into place. And when I saw this the first time, this was a very transformational piece of information to me, and I thought that I would share it out with everybody. So this is really about the impact of professional learning. And so I think of what we've worked on in the last 4 sessions has been our professional learning. If we just kind of have this the sort of professional learning where you get together one time and you're presented a theory. It's kind of, we sometimes call those one and done or spray and pray PDs. Really what you get is you get some initial understanding and awareness from your participants, but what you find is that they don't attain those skills. And most importantly, they're not in a place where they could problem solve around those, apply those skills, right? So you only get maybe 5 to 10% of the people that would attend this one-time session that would actually be able to put that into place. So if you try to put some active modeling with that, you get a lot of the same results. That active modeling does help a little bit, but you're still not going to see any way that people are really able to scale this, right? To be able to put it into place. So what about if you do something like what we did, right? So what we tried to do with this whole process was we tried to give active modeling. We tried to allow time for everybody to practice. We tried to come into rooms and give everybody some low risk feedback on their thoughts and ideas. So does that have a big impact? So we'll see that the understanding and awareness is about the same, but you get a much higher skill attainment. However, even with that, all those pieces that we put into place, you really get a low incidence of people being able to actually problem solve and apply that. So what I'm hoping is that with this group and the different supports that we've had and those sorts of things, I'm hoping that we're able to bump that number up a little bit more. But the last thing that I wanted to say is basically, if we stop now, we're at this stage right now. So what can we do to work together moving forward with more of what I would call kind of being able to coach around this? And so that would mean what kind of study teams, what kind of PLCs can we make? How can we keep this conversation going? How can we at a state level, or how can we at a regional level? What are some ways that we can do to continue to collaborate around this and coach each other? And if we're able to do that, you'll see that this is where the real magic happens, in that our understanding awareness is going to be higher, our skill attainment is going to be higher. And this is where we actually get the actual application, and that being able to bring ourselves up to being problem solvers around this and be able to, basically add this and say, we know what we need to do to be able to put this into place. And you'll see that the research says that it takes 28 repetitions of this kind of work to be able to do that. So the point of all this is to say, we can't be done with this professional development now. We can't say, well, we did the series, or we watched the webinar, or we did this and we're good. We have to keep this learning going. And so with that in mind, I would like you to do just our 2 things that we usually do to finish up our series. And that is to use the Jamboards to talk about the things that you would like to bring back to your district. And then our feedback survey this time is different as well. So our feedback survey this time is really about what are some ways that we can continue to bring this learning forward. So what are the sorts of things that we're going to need to engage in next year, and maybe just some feedback in how to put that together. So our participation in our feedback surveys has been kind of dropping a little bit since their first session. And I would really appreciate getting feedback from everybody that's here to say, how can we bring this forward? What do you still need? And what are some of the forums that we could use to be able to continue to move this forward? So if everyone could please make sure that you take the time to take that feedback survey. It's very short, but if you would be able to provide that feedback, it would be very helpful. And we would also appreciate that using the Jamboards just to say, what are you going to bring back from the learning that you had today? So at this time, I'm going to stop my screen share and give everybody a few minutes to do that. And if there are any additional further questions, I see that we're getting those addressed in chat. Anybody's welcome to put questions in chat. And I think we are actually still able to unmute at this point if any folks had questions.
Don't forget the appropriate time, Dave, to stop recording.
That would be a great time. Thank you, sir.